You know, it's kind of strange watching the internet turn on someone, especially when that someone hasn't actually done anything dramatically different. Lately, I've been seeing a lot of frustration and in some cases, outright hostility directed at Doug Bowser, the president, former president, of Nintendo of America. And I think it's worth taking a step back and asking a simple question. Is this actually fair? Because here's the thing. When people talk about Nintendo today, the pricing decisions, the legal actions, the corporate messaging, the hardware choices, all of that blah blah blah, Doug Bowser's name gets often thrown around like he's personally responsible for all of it. Like he wakes up in the morning, twirls his mustache and says, "How can I upset the fans today?" But that's not really how this works, and I think a lot of the hate he's getting comes from misunderstanding what his role actually is. First, let's establish something important. Doug Bowser is the former president of Nintendo of America. That's a big position, absolutely, but Nintendo is a Japanese company headquartered in Kyoto. The core strategic decisions, hardware direction, pricing philosophy, long-term brand positioning are all largely driven by the Nintendo Company Limited in Japan. Nintendo of America implements, markets, localizes, and manages operations in the West. That doesn't mean Doug Bowser has zero influence, of course he does. But the idea that he single-handedly controls everything fans are upset about, that's just not realistic. And I think part of the issue is timing. Doug Bowser stepped into the role in 2019, after Reggie Fils-Aimé, who had become a larger-than-life personality in the gaming community. Reggie wasn't just a president, he was a meme machine. He was charismatic, bold, quotable, the whole "my body is ready" thing. He felt like one of us. So when Doug stepped in, he was already facing an impossible comparison. He wasn't Reggie, and honestly, no one could be. Doug's public persona is more reserved, more corporate, more measured. He doesn't dominate Nintendo Directs with dramatic one-liners or memes or anything. He doesn't lean heavily into meme culture. He presents himself like an executive. And for some fans, that feels like a downgrade. But professionalism isn't the same thing as indifference. Another thing worth considering is the era Doug inherited. He took over at the peak of the Switch's success. That sounds like a blessing, and in many ways it was. But it also meant he stepped into a period where expectations were sky high. Every decision Nintendo made was amplified, every pricing choice was dissected, every remake announcement sparked debate. When a company is winning, the scrutiny just intensifies. And during his tenure, Nintendo has continued to see massive commercial success. The Switch became one of the best-selling consoles of all time. Heck, it's become Nintendo's best-selling console of all time. First-party games consistently broke records. Franchises like Zelda, Mario, and Animal Crossing flourished. Now, you can absolutely criticize specific decisions, you can dislike the pricing models, you can disagree with how Nintendo handles legacy content or online infrastructure. Those are valid discussions, but attributing every frustration directly to Doug Bowser as if he's the sole architect of every policy ignores the scale and structure of a multinational corporation. There's also this narrative floating around that Doug doesn't care for the fans or that he's too corporate, and I think that's an easy assumption to make when someone doesn't perform enthusiasm in the same way their predecessor did. But look at his background. Doug has been in the gaming industry for decades. He worked at EA. He joined Nintendo in 2015 and oversaw sales and marketing during the critical transition from Wii U to Switch. The period required careful strategy, rebuilding consumer trust, and repositioning the brand. That's not the resume of someone disconnected from the industry. It's a resume of someone that understands business realities. And that's another uncomfortable truth here. Nintendo is a business. It's easy to romanticize companies we love. Nintendo especially has this magical aura. Childhood memories, iconic characters, nostalgia. Heck, I fall for it all the time. I will always give Nintendo more leniency than most companies because it's what I grew up with. It's just human nature. But at the end of the day, it's a corporation making calculated decisions to sustain long-term profitability. That was true under Reggie, it was true under Iwata, and it's true under Doug Bowser. It's also going to be true under Devon. We just tend to separate the fun personality from the corporate structure when it suits us. I also think social media has amplified this tendency to personify blame. When something happens that fans don't like, a DMCA takedown, a price increase, a limited time release strategy, it feels satisfying to attach that frustration to a face, a name, someone tangible. The internet loves to go against the bad guy to feel like they're standing up against the big overlords of the world. But it's just not how it works. Doug Bowser is visible, so he becomes the lightning rod. And Nintendo's legal aggressiveness, for example, is not new. It didn't start in 2019. That tight control over IP didn't suddenly appear when Doug took office. There are long-standing corporate philosophies rooted in Japanese business culture and intellectual property law. We can debate whether those philosophies are consumer-friendly, but pretending they originate from one executive in the American branch oversimplifies the situation dramatically. There's also something else we should acknowledge. Doug Bowser had to navigate an era of massive industry shifts, global supply chain disruptions, a pandemic, and just an increasingly volatile online discourse environment. Leading during stability is one thing, but during constant global uncertainty, let's just say I am not jealous. And yet, through all of that, Nintendo's output remained strong. The brand maintained its family-friendly identity, the company avoided many of the catastrophic missteps that plagued its competitors. Doesn't mean everything's perfect, but it does mean the narrative of incompetence or malice doesn't really line up with reality. And this doesn't mean you can't criticize Nintendo. Criticism, of course, is healthy. Discussion is healthy. Passionate debate about pricing, preservation, and all of that is important. But criticism doesn't need a villain. It's possible to disagree with corporate decisions without turning a real person into the embodiment of all of your frustration. Doug Bowser is not a cartoon antagonist. He's not secretly plotting to ruin your childhood. He's an executive operating within a much larger system. And honestly, that's probably a more complicated job than any of us realize. So maybe the conversation shouldn't be Doug Bowser was the problem. Maybe it should be, what do we want Nintendo to prioritize, and how can we articulate that clearly? Because at the end of the day, companies do respond to trends, data, and all of that, not outrage directed at a single name. It's easy to turn frustration into a target. It's harder, but ultimately more productive to understand the structure behind the decisions we're reacting to. And maybe that's the real takeaway here. Before we decide someone deserves hate, it's worth asking whether we're reacting to the person or a system much bigger than them. But what do you think? Do you think I'm defending the wrong person? Do you think I took all the hate that this guy's getting and turned it into a much bigger thing that did not need to be said? Or, I don't know, you just don't like the sound of my voice? Well, anyway, tell me what you think down in the comments. Bye bye.